What if I told you China is secretly arming Burkina Faso, and 99% of the world has no idea? Declassified satellite images reveal a hidden weapons facility outside Ouagadougou. Not Western aid, not NATO crates, but Chinese drones, artillery, and assembly lines built on African soil. For decades, Burkina Faso begged for second-hand rifles. Today, they are building weapons of their own. This is the story the West doesn't want you to hear. How Ibrahim Traoré turned a forgotten nation into the front line of Africa's military independence. Weapons do not fall from the sky. They are delivered, with contracts signed in the shadows. Those words, spoken by Ibrahim Traoré in a fiery address earlier this year, echo across Burkina Faso like the sound of a war drum. For decades, the West accused Africa of being unstable because of its own weapons. French rifles, American drones, NATO training manuals, all found in the very hands that destabilized African soil. But today, a new question rises. Who supplies the defenders? Here is the fact that Western media dares not print. In June 2025, Burkina Faso signed a confidential framework with China to construct its first indigenous weapons, maintenance, and assembly facility. No more second-hand Kalashnikovs shipped in crates through dusty ports. No more begging for spare parts from Paris. Instead, African engineers, working with Chinese technicians, assembling drones, repairing artillery, and building the tools of sovereignty on African ground. Western intelligence officials, speaking under anonymity, admitted the site was confirmed in satellite images outside Ouagadougou. One report warned, Burkina Faso is becoming the test case. If Traoré succeeds, other Sahel nations will follow. And Traoré himself? His words cut deeper than steel. A nation without the means to defend itself is not a nation. We are not buying weapons to attack. We are building dignity to protect our land. Make no mistake, this is not merely about guns and planes. It is about who controls Africa's tomorrow. To understand why Traoré's move shakes the world, we must first return to the past, to the betrayals written in Africa's soil. For more than a century, the continent was not just colonized by flags, it was colonized by weapons. The French forced young men from Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, and Niger to carry rifles in wars that were not theirs. World War I, World War II, Indochina, Algeria. When the smoke cleared, those same rifles remained, not as symbols of freedom, but as tools of continued control. After independence, the rules of the game never changed. Paris sent aid with one hand, but shipped weapons with the other. Washington spoke of democracy while its contractors armed warlords. The Cold War turned African soil into a chessboard where the pawns were people and the prizes were gold, oil, and uranium. Burkina Faso itself felt the sharp edge of this game. In the 1982nd, when Thomas Sankara dreamed of true independence, he spoke of building tractors instead of tanks, schools instead of prisons. But what happened? Guns silenced him, and bullets ended the possibility of an African renaissance. And whose guns were they? Imported, financed, delivered from the very capitals that today preach stability. By the 2002nd, the Sahel became flooded with weapons from Libya after NATO's intervention. Trucks loaded with arms poured across deserts, seeding chaos from Timbuktu to Gao to Ouagadougou. Villages were burned, children were kidnapped, and governments begged for aid that came with conditions. Stay weak, stay dependent, stay in our orbit. This is the cycle Traoré was born into. A cycle where Africa was not allowed to manufacture its own means of defense, where the same nations that preached peace built entire economies selling weapons to the very continent they claimed to save. And yet, history has a turning point. From Ghana's independence in 1957 to Sankara's revolution in 1983 to the present uprising of the Sahel, the line of resistance has always existed. Each leader who dared to stand against dependency carried forward a spark, Today, that spark burns again in Burkina Faso. But this time, the equation is different, because instead of importing dependency, Traoré is importing knowledge, factories, and the possibility of African self-defense. This is why Western officials panic, not because a single factory changes the balance of power, but because history tells them once Africans start building their own weapons, the empire of dependency will crack. Today, on the dusty outskirts of Ouagadougou, something rises that has never existed before on this soil. A weapons production facility born not from the hands of Western contractors, but from a partnership between China and Burkina Faso. At first glance, it looks like any other industrial complex: concrete walls, hangars, workshops, guarded gates. But step closer, and you will see a symbol. Machines shipped from Shenzhen hum quietly as Burkinabe engineers, young men and women trained in both Beijing and Ouagadougou, assemble the first prototypes of rifles and armored components stamped not with a foreign crest, but with the national emblem of Burkina Faso. This is not just metal and gunpowder, it is the transformation of an entire narrative. For the first time, Burkinabe soldiers will hold weapons produced on their own land by their own hands. Inside the facility, the mood is electric. A 6-year-old engineer named Amadou, trained in China for 2 years, explains to visiting journalists, "For decades, we learned to fix broken machines that came from abroad. Now, we build them ourselves. We are no longer repairmen of dependency, we are makers of sovereignty." End of. That single sentence is enough to send shockwaves through Western embassies in Ouagadougou. Because make no mistake, this factory is small today, but it is symbolic. What if it expands? What if Niger, Mali, Chad, or Guinea decide to follow? What if an entire Sahel bloc chooses to arm itself without Paris or Washington? Suddenly, the monopoly is broken, and the game is no longer controlled by outsiders. Already, reactions ripple across the globe. France calls the facility a destabilizing escalation. Yet in the same breath, French firms continue selling arms across Africa, a hypocrisy not lost on observers. Washington warns of Chinese influence undermining democratic values. But ordinary Africans ask, what democracy lives under foreign weapons? China, on the other hand, presents its role as pragmatic. Every nation has the right to self-defense. We simply provide tools. For Beijing, this is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about proving that Africa can be a partner, not just a market. And the streets of Ouagadougou, they pulse with something new, hope mixed with defiance. Taxi drivers argue in cafes, if Traoré succeeds, our children will not beg for protection from foreigners. We will protect ourselves. Mothers whisper in markets, maybe our sons will not die in someone else's war. Maybe they will guard their own homes. Home, but it is not just ordinary people who watch closely. Across Africa, leaders take note. In Bamako, in Niamey, in Conakry, delegations quietly send observers to study Burkina Faso's experiment. Some governments hesitate, fearing retaliation. Others see destiny. A continent no longer begging for second-hand rifles, but forging its own path to sovereignty. And here lies the true power of the present. Not the number of guns rolling off assembly lines today, but the idea that tomorrow belongs to Africa if it dares to seize it. That is why Traoré walks a tightrope. Every shipment of steel, every blueprint shared, every word spoken carries weight. Allies gather, enemies circle, but the young captain remains unshaken. Because deep down, he knows, history does not wait. The chance to reclaim sovereignty rarely comes twice. But here is where the story bends, where the truth cuts deeper than the headlines. You see, this weapons factory in Burkina Faso is not what the West wants you to believe. It is not merely a site to assemble rifles, nor simply a storage ground for Chinese arms. It is something far more dangerous to the old order, a school of sovereignty. Inside these walls, yes, there are machines, But more importantly, there are teachers, engineers from Beijing, yes, but also Burkinabe scientists, African technicians from Mali, Niger, and Guinea, working shoulder to shoulder. For the first time, the Sahel is not just receiving weapons, it is learning how to make them. Blueprints, metallurgy, ballistics, these are the true treasures being exchanged. A rifle can be destroyed, a factory can be bombed, but knowledge spreads, knowledge multiplies. Knowledge plants itself in minds, and once rooted, no empire can dig it out. This is the real twist. What looks like a simple military deal is in fact a transfer of sovereignty. And sovereignty is the one thing Africa has been systematically denied for centuries. Think of it. In the colonial era, Africans were forbidden from even building railroads without European oversight. During the Cold War, African states were not allowed to produce advanced arms, even for their own defense, without foreign supervision. And in the so-called modern era, IMF loans and World Bank programs quietly locked nations into dependency, importing everything, manufacturing nothing. Now, Traoré is breaking that chain, not with speeches alone, but with steel, gears, and furnaces. The West calls it provocation. They call it destabilization. But ask yourself, who is destabilized by Africa's rise? The people of Burkina Faso, who have the right to defend themselves, or the foreign powers who profit from African weakness? And here is another hidden layer, whispered but undeniable. What if this project is not just for Burkina Faso? What if this site becomes the seed of a pan-African defense industry? One where Niger, Mali, Guinea, and beyond pool their knowledge, their factories, their strength. That is the nightmare of Paris, Washington, and Brussels. Because the day Africa no longer needs foreign weapons, Africa no longer needs foreign masters. And perhaps the biggest twist of all is this. Traoré is not asking permission. He is not waiting for approval from the IMF, from NATO, from the EU. He is building anyway, quietly, determinedly, as if he already knows the truth, that empires do not collapse with explosions, but with quiet acts of defiance that grow into unstoppable realities. The twist is not that Burkina Faso is making weapons, the twist is that Africa is making history. The room is silent, but the world is listening. Cameras hum, pens scratch, the air itself tightens as Captain Ibrahim Traoré rises from his seat. His voice is calm, but it carries the force of centuries behind it. Burkina Faso, he begins, has no quarrel with the people of the world, but we will never again be a playground for foreign powers. Not France, not America, not even Israel. Africa's destiny belongs to Africans. The words ripple outward. Some call them defiant, others call them reckless. But to those who have lived too long under foreign dictates, they are oxygen. He holds up a single document, a set of plans for a weapons assembly line. Simple, functional, yet revolutionary. They say these machines are dangerous, he continues. Yes, they are dangerous, but not to us. They are dangerous to those who built their empires on African weakness. The hall stirs. Across the globe, in newsrooms from Washington to Tel Aviv, editors lean forward, because the subtext is unmistakable. Traoré is not only building rifles, he is firing a shot at the moral authority of the West itself. And then he does what no one expected. He turns directly to the question of Israel. We have watched, he says, voice tightening, as Israel wages war in Gaza, as bombs fall on children, as nations remain silent. And we ask, who dares call us destabilizers when such things are done in daylight? The words hang heavy. It is not just a critique, it is a warning. For decades, African leaders whispered their discontent in private rooms, careful not to anger the global powers. But Traoré is speaking in the open, naming names, breaking the last taboo. And his message is twofold. To the West, stop treating Africa as a pawn. To Africa, stand tall, even when the world shakes. He leans forward now, gripping the podium as if he is holding history itself. We are not asking for charity. We are not asking for mercy. We are building our sovereignty with our hands, with our minds, with our courage. And to those who threaten us, I say this: Africa will no longer kneel. The room erupts, some in applause, some in shock, some in fear, but none can deny what has just happened. Traoré has crossed a line that few dared cross, linking Africa's struggle with the global struggle for dignity, even if it means pointing a finger at Israel and the West. And here is the climax. In that moment, he is no longer just the president of Burkina Faso, he is the voice of a continent that has endured silence too long. He is not asking the world to listen. He is forcing it to. What will come of this? The headlines will call it dangerous. The diplomats will call it reckless. But the people, the farmers in Yatenga, the miners in Guinea, the students in Bamako, they will call it hope. Because hope is dangerous. More dangerous than bullets, more dangerous than bombs. Hope is the one thing that cannot be sanctioned, cannot be silenced, cannot be killed. And in that moment, it is hope that Traoré has given Africa. Night falls over Ouagadougou. The palace windows glow faintly, but the city outside is restless, alive, stirred by the echo of a single speech. Across Burkina Faso, radios replay Traoré's words. In village courtyards, men sit cross-legged by firelight, nodding. In crowded tea stalls, young students argue, their eyes alight with something unfamiliar: belief. This was no ordinary declaration. It was a rupture, a line drawn between the Africa that bows and the Africa that stands. Across the continent, whispers ripple like wind through dry grass. In Bamako, in Niamey, in Conakry, in Johannesburg, in Nairobi, people are asking the same question. If Burkina Faso dares, why not us? But beyond Africa, unease grows. In Washington, strategists mutter about containment. In Paris, voices whisper of punitive measures. In Tel Aviv, analysts argue whether Traoré's warning was provocation or prophecy. Because they all understand something critical: the real weapon is not Burkina Faso's rifles, it is its refusal to submit. And this is the essence of Traoré's warning. He is not simply defying Israel or the West. He is saying to the world, the balance of history is shifting. For centuries, Africa's resources have been siphoned, its leaders bribed or toppled, its sovereignty mocked. But today, one small landlocked nation has dared to say, no more. And if Burkina Faso can resist, then others can too. This is why his words matter. They were not merely defiance, they were invitation. An invitation to Africans to reclaim what was stolen. An invitation to the world to see Africa not as a prize, but as a partner. And to those who sneer, who say, Burkina Faso is too small, too poor, too weak, Traoré's response is simple. So was every revolution when it began. The truth is this: revolutions do not start with armies. They start with courage. They start when one man, one woman, one people decide they will no longer kneel. And that decision, once made, is unstoppable. So tonight, let us not see Burkina Faso as an isolated nation under pressure. Let us see it as a spark, a signal flare over a continent, reminding every African child that they are heirs to kingdoms, not colonies, reminding the world that Africa is not asleep, but awakening. And here is where you, the listener, must decide. Will you remain a spectator, shaking your head as if history is a story written by others? Or will you stand, add your voice, your strength, to the movement rising? Because history is not written in palaces or parliaments alone. It is written in the choices of ordinary people, farmers who plant even when the soil is thin, students who speak even when their teachers are silent, citizens who refuse to bow even when the weight is heavy. Africa's story is not finished. It is being written right now. And Ibrahim Traoré has placed the pen in the continent's hand. The question is, will we write another chapter of dependency or the first chapter of true freedom? The choice belongs to all of us. So I ask you now, do you stand with those who dare to defy, those who dare to hope, those who dare to believe Africa's destiny is its own, or will you let silence be your answer? Because the world is listening.